Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news Sunday night for the Florida Gator fans as one of the more coveted defensive linemen available in the transfer portal, Joey Slackman, commits to the Florida Gators. And this is a guy that for the Florida fans that have been rocking with the fellas for the last couple of weeks, we've been bringing up this name time and time again in terms of being that crown jewel, that top target for the Florida Gators available in the transfer portal, able to lock him in. And you talk about getting some reinforcements at the point of attack for this defense. Joey Slackman, meaningful improvement to that Florida defensive line, an absolute hammer against the run. The department where the Florida Gators struggled down the stretch to stop the run. You're getting one of the best run stoppers up front that was available in the transfer portal. We're going to talk a little Joey Slackman, how he fits into the Austin Armstrong defense, and talk a little bit about some other targets for the Florida Gators in the transfer portal. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Florida fans. This has been a program we've talked a ton about in the high school ranks, in the transfer portal. You guys continue to show a ton of love to the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, can't thank you guys enough for all the support. Dill, going to kick this one off to you. Joey Slackman, the former wrestler, heading to the Florida Gators. How we feeling?
I think this is big for Florida because I think they needed a little more variety in terms of what skill sets their defensive linemen possess. And you saw when Jackson and Banks were on the field, they were relatively decent, I thought, against the run. Again, I thought they didn't have enough depth. That was one big problem. I thought McClellan really didn't blossom into the guy they needed him to be this year. So to bring in a couple of guys, frankly, in Slackman and Taylor, who might add a little bit more athleticism, but probably the biggest thing is just some depth and being able to play a little bit more, few more bodies, because again, I thought they were way too reliant on those top two guys, and you saw when they weren't on the field, they really suffered.
In a similar conversation that we had coming out of the 2022 season, where if you have to play those big bodies as much as Florida had to play them, like they're gonna wear down. It is so important to have an army of guys up front that you can cycle in and out of games. And Joey Slackman, the JUCO edition, and Brian Taylor, that is going to add this depth that the Florida Gators need. Now, talking about Joey Slackman, I'm going to cook a little bit on Joey Slackman. Again, Florida fans, they know how much I love Joey Slackman. You watch the film on Joey, and he's a guy that plays so hard, but you can tell he's a former wrestler. Like the way he uses his hands and plays with good leverage and is able to shed blocks, he wins at the point of attack at such a high level. And the questions that you have of him jumping up from the Ivy level to the SEC, fair questions. I'll tell you this. There's a reason that 40-plus Power 5 teams offer Joey Slackman. He was one of the more sought out. Everyone wants guys who can be disruptive on that defensive line. And the ability or the fact that Billy Napier and this coaching staff can land a guy like Joey Slackman at arguably one of the biggest positions of need is huge. And 26 run stops last year for Penn. And the number I love the most, 0.9 yards of average depth of tackle. This is a guy that wins at the point of attack. He's making his plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. You can't ask for much more. And you start projecting what this defensive line is going to look like for the Florida Gators in 2024. Joey Slackman being inserted is absolutely massive for the Florida Gators.
And even that, just adding the ability to make more tackles. I just didn't think their defensive line made tackles in general. I thought, Banks, Jackson, they were able to hold up and they weren't getting pushed around a ton, but weren't really big-time playmakers. And again, when you have those big-time playmakers in the middle, it just changes everything. When you can make negative plays and do all that's how you stop offenses nowadays. And again, you just really didn't have that last year. Again, guys just not really stepping up, I didn't think, totally to maybe what they need, especially some of the young guys who maybe aren't there.
What I love about Joey Slackman, two things. One, what I love about Billy Napier is he's identified the places this team needs to improve, and he's making those improvements, right? Going out and getting Brian Taylor, a guy that the Georgia Bulldogs wanted in a meaningful way, massive win. And then Joey Slackman, pretty much every Power 5 team in the country. I'm salty that Michigan didn't take him. We were offered him. We wanted him to get him on campus. He ends up going with Florida. Another thing that I have written in my notes or another reason I think he's such a good fit is he's versatile. And in that Austin Armstrong defense, you want to move bodies around, give a lot of different looks. Having a guy like Joey Slackman who could play the 0, he could play the 3, he can play the 5 tech, he can play all over that defensive line, allows Austin Armstrong to get really creative with what he's doing in terms of stunts, in terms of blitzes, in terms of different personnel packages. Joey Slackman, not only a difference maker, but a guy that's going to be scheme versatile. And I think for this particular defense that Austin Armstrong wants to run, you love that.
Yeah, and I think he's been taking a lot of heat, and they're asking why did Billy Napier hire him? But I kind of am with you. I don't think the personnel is quite there. They were very, very young, and they needed a little more depth. And that's been something for Florida. They've been trying to build up really since the Mullen days, where you just didn't really have it. And when he left, everybody kind of left. So they've been trying to work, I think, to build that back up. And it does take a little bit of time. And I think to expect it to just be done immediately. I thought they played better defense, especially for the first half of the year. Obviously, things kind of fell apart a little bit towards the end. But the first couple weeks in games, I mean, you were seeing, especially against teams like Tennessee, like they had the potential. They had the guys to do it. They just need to be a little deeper. And
the injuries, I think, got him. And I think also the combination of that defense is a lot, especially for a young team. Like you're bringing a lot of different schemes, a lot of different looks, a lot of different blitz packages and coverage packages. As Michigan fans, our first year under that new defensive coordinator, that new scheme, you saw some blown assignments. You saw guys playing a little bit slower because they had to think. And you always see like year 2, year 3 under new defensive schemes, guys start playing a little bit faster. They're not thinking as much. They're just reacting and playing ball, flying around. And you combine the new scheme with as much youth that Florida had. That's probably what resulted in some of those growing pains and more largely just the lack of consistency. And I will say this. Like Joey Slackman, the veteran presence that he brings is going to be massive, right? Now, obviously a UPenn guy, but more importantly, you have guys like Kelby Collins, and you have a guy like LJ McCray coming in. There is a ton of young talent that's going to be injected to this Florida defensive line to supplement that with a guy that's played a ton of football coming from the Ivy League schools. I think means a lot. Dill, there's another position that we kind of were hammering in terms of the Florida Gators need to address it. Florida fans know we don't need to read the numbers from the pass protection. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, a guy that kind of flew under the radar in terms of Florida Gator commitments. This is a massive one. We said they need bodies. They need competition on that offensive line. You take a look at his numbers. I mean, 343 pass blocking snaps at San Diego State last year, only gave up 9 pressures. Those are the type of numbers that you want. And it's getting guys that have shown they can do it at a high level. Last year, they went to the portal and got some guys that, they came from Alabama, but they weren't good at Alabama. I don't know what was going to change when they got to Florida. You're getting guys who are good at football, and now they're coming in and hopefully can continue that and elevate to that SEC level of play.
Yeah, and I would certainly think they're not done in the offensive line. I would be really surprised if they didn't take a minimum of 3 guys, because I think you're right. You had an element at Florida where it was starter by default, and there was too much of that. And if you have that creeping in, that's like something I'm like coming around on. At first, I was like, oh, if you have your good front line, who cares what's going on behind you? But I am becoming more convinced that when you don't have any competition through camp and guys just kind of know they're the guy, it probably does take a bit of an edge off you. And I think you've seen it with like a team like even Georgia, where their defensive line really didn't have those monsters, if you will. So the guys who are starting really didn't necessarily need to earn it a ton. And that unit just wasn't as good as it was in the years past, where you went 3 deep of guys who are going to the NFL and going high to the NFL. So I do think just adding competitive depth into this room is going to be huge, because that was, as much as the defensive line had a little bit of thinness, I think their offensive line was far.
They couldn't go to another tackle. And you had tackles just, quite frankly, in some of those games, barbecue chicken. And I'm telling you right now, and Florida fans who've been listening for the last 6 months know I'm kind of in on Graham Mertz. And obviously, we're much more in on Graham Mertz now. If you can pass protect for Graham Mertz, he's going to get it done, right? You got Eugene Wilson. You got a young crop of wide receivers. If they can get that run game going and start pass protecting, that's the key to this offense. Now, another guy, you mentioned it, bringing in bodies, bringing in competitive depth to that offensive line. Florida Gator fans got to get familiar with Maurice Rodriguez coming over from the JUCO ranks. Now, Florida had him on campus this weekend, 6'7", 320. Other SEC schools are in on this guy. Sign me up. 6'7", 320-pound body. You talk about competitive depth. This is a guy that carries it extremely well, too. Checking out the huddle film. Really, really excited to see if they can bring in another guy that's just an SEC offensive tackle body. And Dill, I'm going to kick you off. I'm going to tee you up here because this is one of your guys. Florida Gators trending for a very good defensive back in Chorosky Bridges coming over from the Oregon Ducks. How are we feeling about him?
I mean, a big, long, athletic defensive back. I thought he's been pretty good for the past 2 years. He didn't play a ton this year. I was a little surprised. And Oregon did have a pretty deep stable
Yeah.
with guys like Kyrie Jackson and Jaleel Florence, who are obviously very good players. But this guy can play. I think he's like, again, when you talk about why the transfer portal makes a lot of sense and is valuable in college football, it's for a guy like him who just is a starting quality guy at the Power 5 level, but just got in a room where it got really competitive and there's just only so many snaps go around at that corner spot, but really long, really athletic, and can play a versatile kind of fit into a scheme. Right? I think he can play man and zone and be effective in what Austin Armstrong wants to do.
Huge fan of Trawaski Bridges, and they need a little bit more dog and physicality on the outside. This is a dude that is physically imposing at the cornerback spot. He's going to put his hands on wide receivers. And I mean, let's be honest.
Guy who played a ton of football, which is kind of something Florida definitely needs, where they're playing so many young guys.
1,197 snaps, to be exact. Have it written down in my notes. Has played a ton of football. And again, like Jason Marshall, Jalen Kimber, not really getting it done last year. So you bring in a guy like Trawaski Bridges, who has every single tool in the tool shed to be a really good cornerback at the SEC level. And quite frankly, I love the fit because you want to play aggressive and you want to bring some blitzes and you want a guy that can handle himself on the outside and one-on-one looks. Trawaski Bridges is that guy, and he might be committing as soon as tonight. He's tweeted out yesterday, tomorrow, ... So we'll see. Florida Gator fans, keep your eyes on Trawaski Bridges, one of my personal favorite cornerbacks in this class. We'll end it here again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.